Dr. Jarbel Rodriguez, tell me a little bit about yourself and your work.
Hello, my name is Jarbel Rodriguez. I am a historian of medieval Spain. I teach at San Francisco State University, and I've been at San Francisco State University for about 20 years. I got my PhD at Princeton, and my work on medieval Spain has focused on interfaith relations between Jews and Christians and Muslims. Particularly recently, I've been drawn into the field of soundscapes. So I'm doing some work on sonic history, essentially how the imprint of sounds tells us about a certain society.
All right, well, you have to tell me a little bit more about how we know about imprints of sound from the Middle Ages.
How do we know more? We read, we look at images. We look at images of bells ringing. We read about cannons going off. We look about people creating commotion when they go to the market. So you have to read the texts with an eye towards sonic markers. And that's one way of doing it. You can also do it a lot with visual components when you can see it in the art. That's also something you can figure some of it out from architecture, in the way that buildings are going to sound or not sound depending on the way they are built. So there's a few ways of doing it, and it makes all the sources. One of the things that I love about reading text for these sonic markers is that it forces you to read text that you already knew really well. It forces you to read them as if they were brand new, because now you're looking for some very specific things, right? Oh yeah, lightning. That's a marker. Oh yeah, there's somebody scraping their feet, which are other places you would just kind of just read through. Now they become things to focus on.
That's awesome. So what first you to the Middle Ages way back when?
When I was about 5, I think my dad gave me a castle to play with, and I think I became interested since then. Then after that, a lot of Dungeons and Dragons, a lot of Tolkien, a little bit of Monty Python, the holy trinity of medieval gateways, I guess.
Right. So you had a whole set of notions about the Middle Ages from different forms of media or entertainment, games, movies, and things like that. What do you think what are the most popular or common notions of the Middle Ages you encounter today, with whether in the classroom with your students or in popular culture? Is it similar to what drew you to the Middle Ages, or has it changed?
I think I was drawn by a kind of romanticized version of the Middle Ages, which is I think what you see in something like fantasy or kids games. One of the notions that I see more today than that I see a lot is probably best encapsulated by that scene in Pulp Fiction where one of the characters decides to get medieval. And I only bring that up because it's this notion of the Middle Ages as this period filled with only cruelty and barbarity. That it is something that is very alien to who we are. Some historians have noted that medieval has become shorthand for the not modern, right? Something that is just very different from us. And to me, that's not the way the Middle Ages scan. The Middle
Mhm.
Ages do have that, of course, but there is so much more, and that's usually what I try to bring out in my classes. All the the complexities, the messiness. Some of it good, some of it bad, some of it negative, some of it positive, but not this kind of getting medieval archetype where it can only mean something barbaric.
Right. Well, that I guess that makes me want to ask about some of your own research topics before you got into Soundscapes, when you worked on religion and religious conflict, but also religious interaction, mostly in Iberia. What do you think people get wrong or right, if there is anything, about medieval religion and especially about interactions between peoples of different religions?
I think the thing that they probably get wrong is that they tend to draw very rigid boundaries between religious communities. You're a Christian, you're a Jew, you're a Muslim, and the three shall never meet. And what we know is that that's actually not the case. Yes, there were interactions that were warlike. There were interactions that were violent, but there was also a lot of interactions along commercial lines, along intellectual lines, along personal lines. Sometimes the students don't recognize that. They think that religion becomes the defining variable by which all decisions are rendered. I think one of the things that I've come to realize is just how pragmatic medieval people were, right? Sometimes religion would help them make a decision because that was what was best for them. But if they stood that they were going to make some money or get something else, sometimes religion could be put on the back burner. So it wasn't the deterministic variable that I think we moderns think it may have been in a world where I sound like I'm about to start advertising a movie, in a world in which religion ran the day. Keanu Reeves is whoever you want in there. In any case, I just don't think that it's messier than that. It's a messy past, and when we try to impose these kind of categories on it, we really risk missing out on a lot of the complexities.
Mm-hmm. Well, switching tacks a bit back to sort of how you first got into the Middle Ages, and now a few years later since then, I wanted to ask you about some of your favorite forms of medieval popular media, but in your case, I specifically wanted to ask about what the Middle Ages and heavy metal music have to do with each other, because I think at least out of my circle of acquaintances, you're the expert on that. So could you take a little time and tell us about that?
So what is there? So there's a lot, and a lot of it I still don't understand what the appeal is. I think some of the appeal has to do with heavy metal tends to have sometimes this ethos of masculinity that I think the Middle Ages taps into well. Unfortunately, as well, heavy metal taps into this notion of ethnicity at times, which I think sometimes the Middle Ages misread can tap into that as well. Ultimately, I think heavy metal bands tend to be there's a lot of interest in history in the heavy metal genre for some reason, more than almost any other genre that I can think of. And I think what happens is that just like medieval stuff is very popular in general pop culture, so there's also a subset that makes medieval stuff the most popular historical genre. I would say it's probably the most popular historical genre in when people are trying to write music. You get on top of that with the fact that it can also be, metal can be very experimental. And you can have all kinds of instruments being brought in from, of course, bass, guitars, and drums, but they'll also be using things like violins and flutes and hurdy-gurdies and harps, and that's perfectly fine. So I think it has this, it allows for a lot of this experimentation.
So when you let your hair down and turn the volume up and listen to heavy metal music, what bands are you listening to?
What bands am I listening to that are medieval? I've been listening to a band called Obsequiae, which is from Minnesota a little bit, and they have an album out based. It's not based, but it has elements of this Cantigas de Santa Maria, which is this kind of 13th century Spanish illuminated poetry. There's a German band called Corvus Corax, which tends to do medieval music. And one of the interesting things that they've done is that they've taken the Carmina Burana, which Orff, of course, turned into this kind of 20th century classical music, but they've gone back and tried to recreate it the way it would have been played in the 12th and 13th century, with, as kind of street music. And that actually sounds kind of interesting, at least to me. There's a lot. There's bands that'll do entire concept albums on the Battle of Hastings. There's an Italian band by the name of Thy Majesty that has an entire concept album on the Battle of Hastings. So I think that's going back to your earlier question, why the appeal? I think part of it has to do because of the storytelling. So one of the things that you see often in metal are the concept albums, the albums that from beginning to end, they're telling one story. And some of the material from the Middle Ages lends itself really well to that.
Yeah. No, I'm kind of embarrassed that when I was in the early 80s, early mid 80s, and I was in middle school, I listened to a lot of music as a kid and in my house, and then I wanted to find my own music and found heavy metal, and listened to all the big bands at the time, like Iron Maiden or Metallica that were just sort of new, but I wanted to have my own band that other of my very small group of friends didn't like. And so I settled on Man of War.
Oh
And
yeah.
when I go just for about 6 months or a year, and when I go back now and look at the images of the way the costumes they wore at the time when I listened to their album, which was their first and second album, like I said, I'm a little bit embarrassed and ashamed of myself because there is a masculinity, but it's not like, it's a weird masculinity with a lot of fur and
Yeah.
no.
It's a really interesting thing to look at objectively. And I what I also like is that the fact that it's become more than just European Middle Ages, right? So you see all these bands from around the world writing about their own histories, which is one of the things that I find utterly fascinating. You'll see Middle Eastern bands writing about history of the Middle East, Japanese bands writing about events in Japanese history. So it's really become kind of a worldwide thing.
Excellent. Well, I guess the last thing I just want to know is, are there other forms of media, whether it's TV shows or movies, games or anything like that, that you you know actually enjoy, whether or not you think they have intellectual or historical merit to them?
That's a good question. Movies, I mean, Monty Python is always kind of like the pinnacle, right? It's one of the granddaddies of it all. It's a great movie for medieval history. Games, I don't play that many games, and I haven't been watching that many TV shows. Like, obviously, Game of Thrones would be an obvious answer, but that's one that everybody would be familiar with. What am I reading? I've been rereading, waiting for the third book to finally come out, a book called The Kingkiller Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss. And that's kind of have very heavy medieval kind of Renaissance vibe to it. So I reread it, every 2 or 3 years in anticipation of the next book dropping right away. And of course, I've been disappointed the last few times. So that's where my kind of pop culture is. I have a hard time watching sometimes medieval movies because I become that guy that is like, that didn't happen, that didn't happen, that didn't happen. So I'm like, no fun, and it's no fun for me either. So I've kind of given up on watching medieval movies. I might take a look at the new movie about the duel.
Last Duel.
The Last Duel. I don't know if that's good or not, but at some point I'm guessing I'll
Well,
see
it's Ridley Scott, so it'll be long.
It'll be long.
Not it's good. Well, that's great. I really appreciate your time, and hope to talk to you again.
All right. Thank you very much. Enjoy, guys.
Thank you.